They want to have money available to buy discounted assets on Monday. Well, the only thing they can sell over the weekend is Bitcoin. And so you have that weird thing where Bitcoin still has like a retail story, it has an institutional story, but it also gets sold off, not just because sometimes retail has weekends, but also because institutions have weekends too.
Hello, we're live here at the Cointelegraph booth at Bitcoin Vegas, and I'm joined by Swan Bitcoin CEO, Cory Klippsten. The price itself is obviously down a lot from last year, but what are you feeling in terms of sentiment among the retail investors around the place?
Look, it's so funny because we've had fantastic times at conferences before when the sentiment was so much worse. You know, my favorite time ever at a conference was November of 2022 as FTX was crashing and Bitcoin went, down from 30 to 19, 18, 17 during Pacific Bitcoin. And we were still having a blast because it's just nice to get together with other Bitcoiners. And it's just so easy to talk to people that at least share something at a fundamental base level in common. And you can basically talk about anything else after that. I think it's funny that people assume we get around and just talk about Bitcoin. It's almost like because that's table stakes, then it gives you the license to go off and talk about other things. And then as far as this year, yeah, it sucks to be down from last year, but we're also up 30% off the floor from last month. So I'd say that, if you're in the 75 to 80 range, people are just glad to not be seeing a six handle.
With ETFs, institutional involvement now as well, do you think retail sentiment matters as much for Bitcoin?
Yeah, it still does, because you have to remember, it's not like BlackRock owns the Bitcoin and Fidelity owns the Bitcoin. It's a bunch of retail accounts mostly that actually buy that. So it's, they're buying it in a wrapper, but they still have to take real supply and custody it, and it comes out of the supply. So, it is real demand in ETFs. There are some paper products and futures and things like that that are weird and take a little while to kind of work through the system. But, so there is something to the idea that there is more supply in certain ways. But at the end of the day, if you want real on-chain Bitcoin, the fact that you can get it is what makes Bitcoin unique.
And you've been in Bitcoin for how many years now? Since, the early days of Bitcoin for sure.
I am so far from being an OG. So I first started getting interested in learning about it in 2017, but I wouldn't say I really understood it until probably mid-18. And, I didn't even start Swan until summer of 19. And then we launched, I think, March of 2020. So yeah, it seems like ages ago, but we're really that 2020 vintage was I think I met Lynn Alden a month later and then Saylor another month after that. It was just we're kind of the company's kind of class of 2020.
And how do you feel now about where everything has gone since then? Are you happy with how it's all gone? I mean, US Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, there was an announcement yesterday here at the conference that they're going to be making some grand announcement in the coming weeks as well. I mean, how do you feel about how everything's gone over the last few years?
I mean, it wouldn't be a Bitcoin conference without an announcement about an announcement, right? So I guess there's that. I don't put any stock in it. I don't think it matters. It just is kind of irrelevant what the government thinks or does for the most part, unless they're trying to encroach upon our rights in some way, in which case we should be, angry and write letters and impact legislation and things like that. As far as, institutions and governments getting into Bitcoin, it's not really, I've never been one to say it should be this way or that way. I try to figure out what is and what's likely to be. And I don't think there's anything going on in this recent ramp up of institutionalization of Bitcoin that's about 3 years old now. So if you think of mid 2023 when BlackRock made clear their intention to launch a Bitcoin ETF, and they always get approved, 575 out of 576. So it was going to happen, and everybody knew that, and that was 3 years ago. And these are the things that Hal and Satoshi wrote about on open public forums back in 2009, 2010, that there would be financialization of Bitcoin, and you would end up, they talked about there would be 10,000 different Bitcoin banks with varying approaches to fractional reserve. But at the end of the day, you could hold them accountable because you can always withdraw your Bitcoin to on-chain Bitcoin in self-custody should you choose to. And that really is what it comes down to. And that, again, that's what makes Bitcoin different than any other asset.
And do you see any risks to the ramp up in institutionalization of Bitcoin?
No. Thanks for taking some supply off the table. Appreciate it. It has its own new flavor of volatility versus what we had with retail. And it's basically that when macro things happen, let's just take like one case study, like a hedge fund has a huge portfolio, call it 100 billion. And at the end of their risk curve, the most risky, they're going to do like 500 million of Bitcoin too. And something bad happens in geopolitics on a Thursday or Friday, and they want to have money available to buy discounted assets on Monday. Well, the only thing they can sell over the weekend is Bitcoin. It's also, out of all their assets, the thing they understand the least and bought the most recently. And so you have that weird thing where Bitcoin still has like a retail story, it has an institutional story, but it also gets sold off, not just because sometimes retail has weekends, but also because institutions have weekends too.
You're obviously at Swan Bitcoin, you're managing people's Bitcoin, you're holding their Bitcoin, but it's still self-custody, as you make it very clear. In recent times, there has been concerns around quantum and other risks as well to Bitcoin. For yourself, have you noticed like a ramp up in any concerns from customers at Swan Bitcoin around those issues?
So about quantum, I'd say our customer base is pretty well educated and pretty good at kind of spotting pump and dump scams and schemes and kind of like altcoin token marketing. So I think they pretty much ignored the penny stock pump and dumps around the quantum stuff last year. And they tend to have kind of like a strong BS meter for when VCs try to promote their altcoin companies that are raising on quantum themes, things like that. These aren't new issues. We've been talking about quantum going back 12, 13 years in the Bitcoin space. And, there's plenty being done. And at the end of the day, it's really just the early Satoshi coins or the Patoshi pattern coins. And then the coins that are, basically in taproot addresses where the public key is public and on the internet. Otherwise, it's like really easy to just make everything quantum proof just by moving your coins to a non-public address and you're covered. And even being able to conceive of quantum, from what I can tell, I think we're decades away from even being able to extract a private key from a public key. And I think we have plenty of time. And like the last thing you want to do is something rushed. And the last thing you want to do is like break the social contract and confiscate coins, which is obviously what some people, usually the type of people that would align with like spam and ordinals and altcoins, it's all the same people coalescing around, we must do something right fucking now so that we can make money somehow off of Bitcoin. And it's always the same people.
I mean, you're heavily involved with the Bitcoin community. So what's your thoughts around this whole debate and divide? You see it every day on X, on Twitter. We saw, even with Nick Carter, we've seen some people that are saying with him that he's bringing bad noise into the space around quantum. And there others are debating how quantum should be solved. And then there's others pushing out the threat to saying, 2027, 2028. What's your thoughts around all the noise that's going on amongst Bitcoiners now?
On Nick specifically, like he's smart and he's a good writer, but he talks his book and he creates noise out of nothing to market whatever it is that he's marketing right now. So I think you just have to heavily discount almost anything he says. And it's been obvious that that's true for many years now. So again, I think it's a manufactured controversy and it's basically just to market his portfolio.
And the thoughts on people that are pushing that it was 2030 before, saying quantum is going to be a risk by 2030. But now we're seeing some Bitcoiners saying that it's going to be 2027 and 2028. And what do you think of these people that are like bringing it closer and closer to us now?
The shitcoin marketing, like usual.
And finally, Bitcoin is, like we said, 77,000 today. What do you see over the coming weeks, over the coming months? Are you focused on the Clarity Act like some other people are? Or are you just more focused on the flows and the bigger catalysts that are around Bitcoin?
As usual, I'm pretty much just focused on trying to get people and companies to buy a lot of Bitcoin. That's my main focus. I don't care about flows. And I don't really care much about the short term of what's going on. If I had to say something about, price, I guess I'd say entering the year, probably just because we were still around 95 or something like that, I thought there was probably like a 50% chance that we'd see a new all-time high this year. And I'd say, given that we're still in the 70s and, and that we went all the way down to 60, I'd probably handicap that down to like 20 or 25% chance that we hit renew, like that we hit 126, 127 this year. But the fact that we're even talking about that in a year where in past cycles, like 14, 18, 22 all sucked, and we're sitting here in 2026 and like I reasonably feel like the bottom may be in and that was it. And we only went down 50%. Like That's a heck of an improvement from the last few times of going down 94, 86, 77. I'll take I was thinking anything less than a 70% drop from like peak to trough would be a huge victory in the sense of just dampening volatility and just being kind of like a more random walk up over time. And it does feel like that's happening. And, it's interesting if nothing else.
What would have to happen for you to increase those odds from, say, 25% to 50%?
Number would have to go up very quickly. Yeah. I mean, it's more likely if we get closer to the target. That's all. So if you saw 100K in June or July, I'd give you a much better chance of getting to 130 by the end of the year. That's all.
Finally, Cory, what is the biggest challenge that you think Bitcoin is facing now in the coming years?
So look, there are pros and cons about the ETFs. The pro is that it made it way easier to get people Bitcoin price exposure. And it also pretty much put to bed like the whole crypto versus Bitcoin thing. There was like 6 years of $100 billion of altcoin VC money lying about Bitcoin to promote better Bitcoins. And like, that's the last battle and it's done and the ETFs killed it. But they brought us a ton of supply going into a paper wrapper that's not on-chain Bitcoin. So it's like this much cleaner and much bigger top of funnel where BlackRock and Fidelity and Morgan Stanley are talking about Bitcoin and Schwab is selling it and Merrill Lynch is selling it or whatever, but it makes real Bitcoin like mid-funnel. So most people like at Swan, I'd say like 2/3 of our customers, our new customers already have an ETF. And then some percentage of them start getting curious about the real thing and they start to understand the benefits of being self-sovereign and having some assets outside of the system. So it's a different marketing challenge, it's a different sales challenge, and it's something for the industry and companies like us to adjust to. But I welcome the challenge and it's super fun to do things in a different way and figure it out. You're talking to a different set of people in a different way than you did before when we were just trying to say like, buy Bitcoin, not fucking Ripple. Like that was different. And that's what we did for 4 years. And this is very different.
What is your thoughts on XRP, by the way?
I had no thoughts. Don't care.
Thanks, Cory. Appreciate it. Cheers.
My pleasure.